Hello, algebra students. We're ready for section 6 of chapter 8 where we're going to do more factoring. We are working with our quadratic equations here, and we want to make sure that we can factor with 100% accuracy. Before we get into the new material, please do these 5 review problems. Pause the video and practice that. All right, here are the correct answers. Notice number 4, after I factored, I then solved for the roots. You may leave them as improper fractions always. Section 8.6 is all about quadratic equations. Quadratic equations. Quadratic equations, or a quadratic equation, has a term with an x squared as its highest power. So everything we're going to be dealing with in this section is going to be quadratic because we're going to have x squared as our highest power. So a couple of things you need to remember is to put it in standard form before you start factoring. And you're always, the step number 1 thing to look for is the greatest common factor. That is step 1 of factoring. Find the greatest common factor. I passed out in class today sort of a step-by-step for how to factor. The 2 questions that you need to ask yourself is, what are 2 numbers that multiply to give us C, the last term, and what are 2 numbers that add, those same numbers need to be able to add to give us B. And sometimes you'll see us write this as product sum. So we need them to multiply, the product needs to give us C, and their sum needs to give us B. So let me show you what we're talking about with this first example. So I need a product sum. Let's come back over to this chart. Product sum to multiply to give me 12. Well, it could be 1 and 12. They multiply to give me 12, but do they add to give 7? No. 3 and 4. Actually, I should have done 2 and 6. 2 and 6, do they add to give me 7? No. 3 and 4, do they add to give me 7? They do. So that's our winner. So when we factor, we're undoing the FOIL method. Because it's both positive, we'll both have positive signs. Multiples of 12, product needs to be 12, that add to give us 7. And it doesn't matter if you said x plus 4 times x plus 3, the order does not matter. Right, I'm just going to go ahead and move across. Number 3, I need product to give me 2 and the sum to give me 3. Well, since it's 2 and it's prime, there's only 1 times 2, which gives us 2. And they add to give us 3, so it's going to be x plus 3, excuse me, not 3, x plus 2, and x plus 1. And that's how easy that one is to factor. I'll let you try number 2 on your own. Now let's look at number 4. We do not have both positives here. We have a positive and a negative. Also, there's a number in front of our x squared. So what's our step number 1? I didn't do it for the other 2. Maybe I did it in my mind, but I didn't say it out loud. Step number 1 is to look for greatest common factor. And if you can factor the 2 out, then you have x squared minus 10x plus 16. So the 2 is going to stay there. Now we're going to have to come over to the right and do product sum. I need multiples of 16. There's 1 and 16, but this time they need to add to give me a negative 10. So it needs to be negative, negative, because when you multiply 2 negatives, you get positive. And when you add 2 negatives, they stay negative. So I know it's going to be x, and they're going to be same sign, both negative, because I need them to multiply to give me a positive. So how about 2 and 8? Oh, that works, 2 and 8. So before I even try 4 and 4, 2 and 8 works. Negative 2 times negative 8 gives us a positive 16, and negative 2 plus negative 8 adds to give us a negative 10. So that is the factored form of number 4. Now what if the C is negative? Now number 4, the B was negative, but if the C is negative, here's what it means. You are going to have opposite signs. Opposite signs. That means when I factor, by the way, there's no greatest common factor, I'm going to have 2 different signs in my parentheses. So now it's still product sum, and when we multiply a positive times a negative, we'll get a negative. But the sum, the tricky part on the sum is when you add opposite signs, you always subtract and keep the sign of the larger. So this tells me I want my larger number, the larger number, to be positive. So multiples of 30, there's 1 and 30. Those do not subtract to give me 13. There's 2 and 15. Hey, that works. Those subtract. Why am I saying subtract? Because I'm going to have a positive and a negative. So my larger number is 15. So if I make the 15 negative, 2 times negative 15 gives me a negative 30. And then when I add 2 plus negative 15, I'm going to get, whoops, I need my larger number. I sat there and said it and wrote it wrong. The larger number needs to be positive. See how you catch that? The larger number needs to be 15. The smaller number was 2. And this is what I'm talking about when I talked about the FOIL man, the inside last. This gives us 15x. This gives us negative 2x. Add those together. And if you get 13x, then you know that you have factored correctly. In number 4, we're going to take out the greatest common factor of 2. Oops, I forgot to take out the 2, so that leaves me with 4x and minus 5. So I need multiples of 5, which it's prime, so when I check my product sum, I only have 1 and 5. And the trick's going to be where to put my sign. I know they're going to be opposite signs because I need them to multiply to be negative. But when I add them, I need to keep it positive. So it's going to be 5 and 1. Check. When you multiply, you get negative 5. And when you add, you get 5x plus a negative x, negative 1x, gives us a positive 4x. So this will be our final answer. All right, there's 2 on the next page for you to practice. For number 3, I need to bring my x over, makes it a negative x, minus 20 equals 0. And I have opposite signs. Because of this negative, I need a positive and a negative. This time, I want my larger number to be negative because when I add the two numbers, I want to keep it negative. So multiples of 20 that subtract to give me 1, and that's easy. That's 5 and 4. Now check to see. I gave my larger number the negative because of this negative sign right here. 4x plus negative 5x leaves me with negative 1x. So what's going to be our roots? What's going to make this 0? A negative 4 and a positive 5, because negative 4 plus 4 is 0 and positive 5. You can do that in your head for number 3. All right, an architecture is looking at a room, wants to build a new studio, art studio, that has 3 times the area of the old studio by increasing the length and the width the same amount. So here we see they've just put x, the same amount. We're going to increase our length and our width. What will the dimensions of the new studio be if the new area is going to be 360 square feet? So we have area is length times width. So we have a length of x plus 12 and a width of x plus 10. And we want the whole area to be 360. So when we do the FOIL method, we get x squared plus 22x plus 120 equals 360. And we're going to need to factor, or actually let's bring our 360 over. So x squared, and it's going to keep messing up because of my clip art, x squared plus 22x. And when you subtract 360 from 120, we have a negative 240 equals 0. So now I'm ready to factor, because the greatest common factor is 1, because there's no number in front of our x squared. And I need multiples of 240. So check in my product sum. I need multiples that multiply to give me a negative 240. So I'm going to need a positive and a negative, opposite signs, looking for 240 that subtract to give us 22. Well, 2 and 120 do not work. 4 and 60 do not subtract to give us 22. 5 and 48 do not work to give us 22. I'm going to keep listing my possible multiples. 6 and 40 do not subtract to give us 22. And finally, 8 and 30 will work. 8 times 30 is 240. I need them to subtract, though, and give us a positive 22. So my bigger number is 30. My smaller number is 8. So those are my possible solutions. What's going to make this 0? Now watch this. To make this parentheses 0, I need a negative 30. To make this 0, I need an 8. And since I am doing a geometry problem, x cannot be negative length. You will throw out the negative 30 and x should be 8 in this problem. Go ahead and practice the next word problem, but before you turn off the video, I have one more concept I want to talk about. I want to refer back to the box that's on your handout about the steps of factoring. The plus in the first box stand for these plus signs here. So if they're both plus, then you know when you factor in your parentheses, you're going to have two positive plus signs in your parentheses. Second, the second line is saying if you have a plus sign here and a negative sign, you're still going to have the same sign, but this time they're both going to be negative. Because remember, when you're doing FOIL, you'll end up with negative times negative, which made positive, and then you're going to add, and they need to be negative. So I'm trying to give you little helpful hints. When it's a plus here, means same sign, both negative, same sign, both positive. But when your second sign is negative, you know you're going to have opposite signs. Now, how do I know which one goes where? This sign is going to tell you the sign of the larger number. So this negative tells you opposite signs, just like this. And then when you figure out your product sum, this tells you when you add, doing FOIL, when you add the outside inside, you want to have the larger absolute value positive, so when you subtract and keep the sign of the larger number, it's positive. So that's where these are going to get tricky, and these are just mnemonics. So this tells you opposite signs, and then when you figure out your product and sum, multiply to give us negative. A positive times a negative is negative. Then when we add and we keep the sign of the larger, this is telling you the larger needs to be positive, and then this scenario tells you that they're opposite signs. Notice I wrote plus minus exactly the same, but this tells you the larger value should be negative, because when you add and keep the sign of the larger, you want the larger number to be negative. So again, it doesn't matter if you said x plus and then x minus, or x minus and then x plus. You're going to have x's here, and the numbers are determined here by the product sum. I hope the more we work through this, I know it sounds like Greek today, but bear with me, it's going to get better as we work through factoring. Thanks for your patience and have a great day.